Get my freaking pen open. Alright, there we go. So, last time we finished the early imperial era with the Jin dynasty. So now we're going to continue through the southern dynasties, the Sui, Tang, and Song dynasties. We're going to skip the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period just because I don't know very much about it. Also, those weren't really dynasties. They were more like kingdoms that existed for like 10 years. Jesus, that took the breath out of me. But yeah, we're going to keep going. We're going to go up to the Song dynasty, then we're going to stop there, and I might continue even later today or go into tomorrow. Alright, so let's start here. I'm not going to do any of the northern dynasties just for the sake of, well, they weren't necessarily dynasties. They didn't control very much land. I will go over the northern Qi, though, because they were mostly Chinese. They weren't really Mongolic like the other northern dynasties. Alright, let's go. Now, first, we're going to go over to the Liu Song dynasty. It was actually just the Song dynasty, but it was ruled by the House of Liu, which was the same ruling house that ruled over the Han dynasty. Now, this is considered a golden age in the southern dynasties. It was also the largest of the dynasties, second to Jin, which was slightly bigger. And it existed for a very fair amount of time. Probably the second or first of the the southern dynasties in length. I'm gonna fix this, it's kind of bothering me. Right there. But yeah, the Liu Song dynasty was it didn't control all of China, it was still beat back by the Wei people. So I'm gonna go ahead and count it here. Now, next is the Qi dynasty, and the Qi was very short-lived. It only existed for about the same period of time as the Qin dynasty, and it was claimed to be a very chaotic period of time. It lost Shandong to the Wei dynasty, and it was just a very unstable period of time. It didn't really hold all that much value, and it was quickly replaced by the Liang dynasty, which we'll go over next. So all in all, I'm going to go and put it over here. I know there's not really another dynasty named Qi, but I felt like I needed to put the S there to represent that it's a southern dynasty anyways. But I'm not really going to do that with any of the other dynasties. Now next we're going to move on and go to the Liang dynasty, which was considered a second golden age in the southern dynasties following Liu Song. This one existed for a very long time, over 20 years, which is kind of like a big thing for the southern dynasties because most of the 4 didn't exist for very long. They were kind of short-lived. They got conquered or overthrown. So this was kind of a big thing. It had several tributary missions from countries around Asia that came to it, and it was very developed for its period of time. However, after the reign of Emperor Wu, it would kind of just fall apart. So because of that, I think it fits down here at the B tier. It fits there because it had tributary missions from countries all around the world, so it had very self-awareness with other cultures, and it was very powerful for its time. However, after the reign of Emperor Wu, it kind of went downhill in a very short period of time, and that's why it isn't over up here in any of these areas. Now, the last of the southern dynasties is known as the Chen dynasty, and the Chen dynasty had several emperors, but a lot of these emperors weren't really good. They weren't tyrants, they were more just incompetent. A lot of them were really obsessed with just like their fellow eunuchs or women and parties in like the royal courts. But it did make gains against the northern dynasties like the Qi and the Zhou. However, it would eventually be conquered by the Sui dynasty near the end of its existence. Jesus. But yeah, it really wasn't that great, so I think that it would fit next to the Zhou here. So now we're going to move on to the northern Qi, and then we're going to hurry up and go over to the Sui dynasty and go over it real fast. We're kind of like going to power drive through the Qi. All in all, this dynasty was mostly Chinese, but the government of it was kind of a mix between Mongols and Han Chinese people. Now, they were really discriminatory against the Han Chinese, and when they were invaded by the Northern Zhou dynasty, which was its neighbor, it collapsed apparently within a month. So it fell apart very fast, just to show how tyrannical it was. But when it was founded, it was the most powerful and wealthy of the dynasties in China at the time. So I think that does fit it at an E tier instead of an F. Alright, now we're going to go through the Sui dynasty. This one is kind of a mixed bag because it had a lot of good, but at the same time it was short-lived and it also had plenty of bad. It did a lot of developments like the Grand Canal and stuff like that, but at the same time it recruited like thousands and thousands of men, and then it went on to those campaigns like against the Goguryeo Koreans where it got absolutely slammed, and after that it just exploded and eventually got deposed by a warlord who founded the Zhang dynasty, which wasn't really a dynasty in itself. It was just a warlord state that only existed for a couple of years. So they didn't even really get overthrown by someone who was all that powerful for a long time. So I think we should just kind of mark it, I don't know, here. I don't think we're going to have any other C tiers in this area. So I think now would be a very good time to just consider we don't really need any more C tiers because a lot of the dynasties that come after this are up here or further down here. So the next one is the Tang Dynasty, which is actually probably one of the greatest and most powerful dynasties of China. It was extremely wealthy. This was actually where gunpowder was created, and it had a lot of contact with countries like Persia and the Mongol people, and especially in Korea and Vietnam. However, eventually, towards the end of its existence, it would be further harassed by the Tibetan people from, well, Tibet, and that would cause it to go into a very short and very bitter downfall. However, because of its developments and just how almost utopian it was during its golden age, I do think that it could be put up here with the Western Han Dynasty. Now, I also want to go over a very brief-lived Zhou Dynasty that existed during the Tang Dynasty. It was ruled by an empress named Wu Zetian. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's kind of one of those hard things. But it existed for only a couple years before she was put out of charge. But it had a lot of developments, mainly in like reforms for women's rights because it was ruled by an empress. And it existed for a fairly long period of time. So I think we could mark it over at A tier because it was okay. It just didn't live for very long, and also it was kind of a usurper. Next, we're going to move on to the Liao Dynasty, which wasn't actually Chinese, but it was recognized by the Song government as a legitimate empire of China. So I think we should go ahead and mark it anyways. The Liao Dynasty, it was a lot of things at once. It wasn't ruled by the Chinese, but it had a lot of Chinese aspects in the government. It made its capital, or its southern capital, Beijing, and it was extremely powerful against countries like the Song Dynasty, and it put a lot of steps forward to kind of make friendly relations with the Mongol people in the north and the Song Dynasty. However, it went about this kind of forcefully. So I think that we would need to put the Liao Dynasty down at the B tier because it wasn't really Chinese, but at the same time it did try to assimilate itself. And even after it was overthrown by the Manchu people and it went into Western Asia to try and keep itself alive, it was recognized as a legitimate dynasty of China until its conquest by the Mongols. So I think we can put it down. This is B tier, right? No, that's A tier. Did I mean to put this at the B tier? I don't even remember, but I think it would be fine at A tier. So let's go ahead and put this one. And next we're going to move on to the Song Dynasty. The Song Dynasty was probably one of the greatest dynasties of its time period, especially as one of the last Han Chinese dynasties, second to Ming, which came after the Yuan Dynasty. Now, this one made very good use of gunpowder, and it was a very military-wise powerful country, and it had a lot of economic developments in the southern Indian Ocean trade route and the Silk Road. So it was very stable for its time until it was eventually conquered in the north by the Jin dynasty, where it kind of started becoming an incompetent mess. And even after the Jin from the Manchurian region conquered its northern territories, they managed to fend them off up until its conquest by the Mongols. So I would consider it a very good dynasty, and I would put it up here. Not necessarily as good as these two, but I think it deserves to be in the S. Next, for our last dynasty, we have the Jin. Now, the Jin was kind of one of my least favorite dynasties in general because it was well, first of all, it was foreign. But unlike the Liao dynasty, which tried to actually do diplomacy, it allied with the Song, and then it went straight for conquest as soon as the wars against the Liao ended. So I don't think it was a very good dynasty, and the emperors that it had were really incompetent. The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan, insulted the Jin emperor, so he immediately went to declaring war, and then he got his butt smacked, and Zhongdu was sacked, and then he just relocated to Kaifeng and tried to fight them again, and then got beat again, and then he was conquered by Yuan and Song at the same time. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put an M next to it just so it could kind of be signified as the Manchu Jin. I'm going to put it on D. I think that's a pretty good place to stop for now. We'll go ahead and go on to the Yuan, Ming, Qing, and I guess we could kind of go over Taiping because it existed for a long period of time, even if it was just a rebellion. See, I got this right here, which I think is pretty cool.